Hi there, I'm Shy. I'm a developer advocate at Superblocks, and I want to share with you the project I built over this past holiday season. So I had about 12 days off for my holiday break. Usually I take the time between New Year's and Christmas off and kind of just relax. And I do like coding and having kind of the time to build stuff for me. So one of the things I do when I'm like kind of looking for a new project to build is I kind of like going to Google Domains and seeing what's available. And I have a bunch of other domain websites I use. But in this case, I use Google Domains because I find that it's pretty transparent with the pricing. And for me, I'm looking for a URL that has a reasonable renewal fee and not too crazy and upfront. So Shy.online, never happening. One of the ones I did find was Shy.party, and I felt kind of like this great inspiration to build something when I saw that URL. So I'm going to share with you a tool I've been using a lot in New York. So I'm really into this website called Partiful, and so are all my friends. It's an event kind of management thing. It sends you text to your events, it lets you know who's coming, gives some details, gives some pictures, kind of track all the things. I don't think I've been invited to an event that my friends have hosted in the last 6 months that hasn't been through this service. So it's gotten pretty prolific in New York City. Facebook events aren't really a thing anymore. And so I felt like this would be a good excuse to rebuild it. So I went ahead and I put together Shy.party. So this is Shy.party. If you go to the URL, that's what you're going to see. And I had a couple constraints here with building this website. So first off, it had to be fast. I had 12 days off, and I was hosting an event on the 16th. So I had a dinner yesterday. And I didn't want to waste too much time putting that together. I needed to give my friends time to RSVP and all that stuff. I didn't want to deal with user auth. Partiful does user authentication through a text message code, so kind of like a two-factor, but only the authentication code. So you get a 6-digit number, you type it in, and you're logged in. Didn't want to deal with any of that. I also wanted to use some things that I'm using for work. So I wanted to do a bit of dog fooding and use the product for the company I've been employed at for 4 months. I felt like that'd be a good use of my time and would end up being valuable as well. And I didn't want to do any deployment nonsense. I didn't want to deal with AWS or GCP or any of those guys. So I ended up dealing with Netlify instead. Netlify was kind of my solution to the deployment problem. And that worked out really well because it ended up also kind of defining my stack. Netlify is a static site provider, which meant I had to do something in the JAMStack world. So I'm a Python developer, and I love using Flask. And you might be thinking, okay, Flask, that is not a static site generator. But there's a library out there called Flask Frozen. And Flask Frozen is really cool because it'll crawl through your website, and it'll create HTML pages based on what's on your website. So it's kind of like a static site generator for Flask, and it gives you the build directory. Netlify can support it. You just let it know the version of Python that you're using, and then kind of everything just magically works. And so that's what I ended up building this site in. Now, to deal with the RSVP constraints, I want to show you kind of my database and how I've set things up. So I've got 3 tables in here. I've got an attendee table, which has my attendees and their dietary restrictions, and also their phone numbers, but I've gone ahead and hidden that. And we've also got a events table. So this is when our events are happening. You can see I've got the next one up already. And then the entire website is managed through this junction table. So every time I create a new event, it goes ahead and it spins up a bunch of new junctions for me. I have a script that gets run whenever I do that. And what it does is it gives me all of these unique IDs. So these are all nano IDs. And if you go to one of these nano IDs, you will go ahead and you'll get a page that is for an event and for a person. So let's go ahead and look at one of those pages. So this is shy.party/RSVP, and then it's got a nano ID for me in the database. And so this is a custom page that theoretically only I'm going to get to see. Now, all of my invites get sent out via text message. So I'm going to text you this invite custom, and that's really easy to do. I just use Twilio for it. So this site gets built when Netlify goes and actually triggers a deploy for me. There's a couple things in here that are being done dynamically. So the status of if you're attending is not, hard-coded into the deploy, because then every time I would need to update a user state, I'd have to re-trigger a deploy. And my deploys take about 30 seconds for just the Flask stuff, and then another 35 seconds for the Netlify plugins, things like Lighthouse and stuff like that. So not really a viable option for a user is to wait a minute. And then also, who's coming as well. So I don't want to have to rebuild anytime any of this changes. And then I also want to be able to let them click things and, feel like the event is changing and the page is changing and give them the feeling of state changing. And so those are my constraints here. And so what I ended up doing is I used some of Netlify's built-in stuff for this. So Netlify has a bunch of really built-in cool stuff. It's got, lighthouse scoring. I'm actually really bummed that my SEO is a 92, and I will explain why later. But we're also doing some function stuff, and we have a Lambda function that's managing our attending, not attending, and then we have an edge function that gets triggered anytime you load a page. And the edge function is really cool because what it does is it intercepts the page loading. And we can go ahead and take a look at the code for this as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this attendee RSVP. So this is just a HTML image. And whenever I run this website, whenever I freeze it, it goes through and it generates a page for every single event junction based on that nano ID. So everyone will get this page custom. And then we'll go ahead and put in the status unknown and attendee unknown. And we'll use the edge function. So over here, the edge function will get run before the page load. So it'll kind of intercept the page load. And what it's doing is it's making a request to Superblocks, which is the company I work for. And it's asking Superblocks, hey, can you go ahead and do a quick database lookup for me and then pass me back the format of the data that I want. And then it'll go ahead and just do a replacement, and then it'll return that replaced page. So over on the Superblocks side, we have these things called workflows. Workflows are kind of like steps. Here you can see I've configured the workflow. We're doing a lookup. We're doing a who's attending, and we're humanizing it, right? And then we're passing that back over to the Netlify function, which then does the page replacement. And Superblocks is giving me a URL that I can call this function from. I can also call it from inside a Superblocks application. And Superblocks applications are pretty solid because this is kind of how I'm managing all of the event logistics and stuff. So I can see who's attending. I can get a link to my little custom page if I want it. I can create new events, which will also build my entire new junction table for me. I can create new attendees. I manage my invite sending through this as well. So I've got a little button that I can click that'll send all my text messages. So it'll do a lookup of who's invited and what the event is. I'll grab the time, humanize it in JavaScript, and then send out a custom bespoke text message to all my attendees with their private RSVP link that they can check into to let me know if they're able to come or not. So that's kind of how everything is run on the Superblocks end. And we also have another function that I use for form handling. So that's kind of how I'm using the state update here. And we can go back to VS Code, and we can take a look at this RSVP again. And if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see we've got a bit of JavaScript in here that handles an event handler. So each of my buttons has an event handler on it, and it calls my submit RSVP function, which is just kind of calling a standard form submission. But what we're doing is we're going to go ahead and intercept the form. So Netlify has a bunch of built-in form handling, which is great. But I actually don't really care about the data. I'm never going to look at the response of the form. So what I end up doing is I disable the default form behavior, and then I go ahead and I make a quick request, again, to a Superblocks URL, which is going to go ahead and update my status for me. So it's kind of acting as a serverless function for me, essentially. I could have done this on Lambda, but instead I did it on Superblocks. And so I'm going to go ahead and update my notification, and then I can go ahead and add a little message and update the text. So a user will get the updated behavior and feel confident with what's happened as well. And so this is a pretty easy way of, I think, managing it and running it all through Netlify. And the code for that form handler is all kind of right in here as well. So we're calling the Netlify function, which is then calling the Superblocks function as well. And it does a bit of spam protection as well, and it handles kind of like the API keys and all of those things for me too. So this is a pretty cool little way of doing it. I'm essentially just using serverless, which I feel like is a pretty common way of doing kind of the dynamic functionality as well. So I'm really happy with how this website turned out. Like I said, I'm a little bummed out that my SEO score is only a 92. I have the entire website actually disallowed via the robots.txt, and so I feel like it should be a 0 instead of a 92, but if anyone has any other ideas of how I can make the SEO score worse, please let me know. I don't really want people using this website unless they're my friends or my found family. Like, I want to be sending these bespoke invites to the people that I care about. And this is a website that's only going to be used by me, and that's kind of okay, and I'm kind of into it. I'm really happy that I actually managed to build something on this and do something useful with a domain for once. Normally they kind of just sit there or act as like redirects for my personal website as well. But yeah, that's kind of what I built, and it's all up on GitHub. You can grab the code at shy/party, and if you want to ask me any questions or follow me, I'm on Twitter as well at Shy Ruparel. And yeah, that was my lightning talk. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was a lot of fun. Bye, everyone.